Welcome to the Classical Odyssey, Sola. I'm very happy to welcome you to the Classical Agora, which is a series of episodes where I interview mostly artists, but not necessarily, because art is not just for artists. I always love to contextualize it and talk about its importance in society and as a tool to explore things that are impossible to explore by other means, such as science or gaining knowledge. I did an interview with you on your channel, which I'm really happy to share. I'm going to share in the description. And I really encourage the audience to follow you because you cover a lot of interesting topics. It's mostly dealing with philosophy, theology, I guess, very important questions within these realms, but not limited to. And you have a fascinating background because you're a veteran, as far as I know. So
Yep.
you have a military background, and now you're studying
Psychiatry.
psychiatry. So I'm gonna let you present yourself and give us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, and thank you for having me on. So, a quick brief background about me. I'm Roman Catholic, and I've recently got into the whole Twitter scene with meeting a bunch of great people and using that to network out and start my own show, which is Requiem Radio. I do that alongside with Hazy Dialects, who's a friend of mine. So we primarily, like you said, do interview people who talk about philosophy, art, history, theology, and politics. Actually, recently, someone you'd really like, I'll talk to you about this later, but he has a PhD in medieval historical art, and we were able to do a conversation on that. But some of my main hobbies I do is powerlifting. I am a veteran, recently got out, and now I'm currently at university studying to eventually be a psychiatrist.
There's so much about your background. It's so interdisciplinary. Um, what does art mean to you? And did art or beauty in general, because art deals with beauty, as I very often mention, um, what role did it play in your life? And how did it contribute to who you are today, your interests of today, and even your relationship to God?
Yeah, you mentioning that definitely art was a very big contributor that brought me back to the Catholic faith. And when you mention that, I think specifically of a quote by Aquinas where he says, art is the right reason for making things. So my view of art has definitely evolved a lot as I progress more and read and get into the Catholic Church. But one universal thing that's always stuck with me is the belief of an objective beauty, an objective standard, because especially in our age of like modernism or like secular humanism you see today, art is very bland and disgusting, or what they call art. And it's to the point where just something in me, without even me reading these stuffs, have like an intuition knowing this doesn't feel right, it doesn't look like art. So for me, art is almost in three forms, where you have the form of virtue, the form of imitation, and the form of faith. So for the form of imitation, for the form of virtue, I always see it as being something that is the practical intellect of man. So why do we do art is really the question. It is something that we're doing to produce things with a certain rationale or order, because humans are naturally called to hierarchy and order. So art inherently involves this correct reasoning about the way to make things, to have it structured. Hence why you see most art is being very formatted and very beautiful in that way. The second stage of art that I always view was through art of imitation, where art at its core could be seen as an imitation of nature. So a perfect example is you see tons of artists doing complete canvas works of beautiful scenery around us. Me recently, I did a trip to Alaska. It was beautiful up there, just hiking, and in a way, I felt like I was surrounded by what was just God's canvas. So it really is just human creativity reflecting on what is the divine, what is created by God, who is at the end of the day the ultimate artist. He's the highest being. And by doing that, I think, okay, so we know the rational reason why humans do art. We know who the true artist is. That leaves us to our third one, which is always a question for me, in the sense of like, what is our role in all of this? And I believe the purest art is an expression through faith or through an appeal to heaven as us trying to get ourselves as best as we can to what heaven would be like, whether that be through music, through sculptures, through architecture, through paintings. This is seen as like something that's an expression of truth for us, of the faith, what is sacred and what is holy. That's why what's seen as like some of the best arts is either Gregorian chants or, any Latin chants or anything that's like beauty that's an appeal to heaven. What is, in a way, it makes God visible for the invisible mysteries of our faith. So that's a brief explanation on me in art.
It's a very brief but highly systematic explanation on art. You basically gave a full comprehensive definition what I also believe that art is, because I mean, it's so many things, but I like that you mentioned the imitation part, and that leads to the question of originality, which I often talk about, because there's no such thing as originality. I mean, truly, as an artist, you do imitate God in the sense that you do replicate somehow the act of creation, but it is within the limits that God already gave you. You're not really inventing anything. You're just experimenting something of the divine nature, and that is God revealing Himself through the created realm in which we live, and that's something that we can explore to a supra-sensorial level or supra-rational level, because science is limited by reason, and obviously God, the logos means reason, means argument, idea, materialized, but it's also the things that are above reason. God is above reason. He's not limited by our reason. It's way above that. And so art helps us go to that higher level. And I wanted to ask you, how did you, are these thoughts that you had for a very long time, and through experience and reading and or meditating, you came to this definition, or is it something more recent interest of yours?
So my views have definitely been evolving on this, and I would say yes and no to it being more of a recent thing. That's just been more of me reading into philosophy and theology and asking myself questions that I usually don't ask myself, like, well, what is art? Like, what is this? Because at the end of the day, everyone could have that intuition where they think, they have that gut feeling like, okay, this isn't art, but this is art. But they never take the extra step of like, why? And for me, one of the things I've always thought about, I've always loved like reading. That's been a passion since I was a child. And I could tell, like, okay, this is a good story, this is a bad story, and in a way that influenced me to ask the question for art: what is good art? What is bad art? And that's something that I'm still working through a lot, definitely. But I'd say my view has been gradually evolving more, but it's always been a consistent, we need to have art that's an appeal to heaven, because I believe that is a truest form of art. Even in a sense, for my name on Twitter, Sola Requiem, the Requiem part, I got that from Mozart, because Mozart has a symphony called Requiem. And a beautiful story about this was when he passed away during his eulogy, some of his Requiem pieces were unfinished. And some of his mentors at the time, I'm blanking on the name of the individual, was looking over the symphony and the composure that he's putting together. And he said he silently wept in his room, in his chambers, reading it. And during his eulogy, he said to the audience there that this is truly the closest we could get to perfection, the closest we could get to God. This is a requiem. And to me, that was like so beautiful and passionate. And when I have that name for me, Sola Requiem, for my pseudonym, I do that as in all actions, all what is virtuous and good should be an appeal towards heaven. And foundationally, most important of all, that should be art at the ground basis. Because if we are not doing things for the beauty, why are we doing them at all? What is the purpose of this? And that's what I'd bring for on the table for my view.
I love all the facets that can be explored just by asking the question what beauty is. I've asked my friends, and I've asked other people who I've invited on my channel, and there's such a beautiful congruency that everything is coming somehow together like pieces of a puzzle, because everybody presents a facet of what beauty actually is. And ultimately, it deals with the divinity, because God is beauty and He's the initiator, the creator of beauty in the world that we can experience through our senses. And it's such a joy to hear this explained in such a systematic manner, very, very well thought. And um, I wanted also to ask you a little bit about your military background, and if that impacted you in a specific way, if that gave you some probably hard lessons about the reality of this world, and probably why we need ideals, because art definitely deals with ideals. I love the conversation we had on your channel, because we came to the topic of Platonism versus Aristotelian philosophy, because one can deal with the pragmatic a little bit more, whereas the other one gravitates a little bit more towards the ideas and mysticism. These two views that actually ultimately complement each other. So yes, then the question is actually if your military background taught you something or made you think in a more personal way or a more profound way about why we need ideals and how that contrasts with the reality of the world, how it is.
Definitely. And for me, when I was in the military, I was 82nd Airborne, and they're seen as like the poster boys, if you will, for the United States Army. And being part of that environment was to be the cream of the crop if you were there. It meant that you were supposed to wear yourself with a badge of honor and like carry yourself a more grandiose than you would regularly anywhere else. It's very much ingrained in a culture there where it's like everyone's at a higher standard. And being in this environment definitely influenced a lot of my thinking because I was in a place where there was a lot of order, structure, hierarchy. And this is going to sound kind of funny, but I remember for a while just being on post, being around people, and then leaving and visiting family and going back to where I used to live at for a holiday and noticing a bunch of people who were, either obese, people who had like blue dyed hair, they'd look all crazy. And to me, it was just chaotic. And I was like, I'm not trying to sound weird by saying this, but like disturbing in a sense where I'm like, why are people doing this to themselves? To me, it looks like this self mutilation. And it was very heartbreaking. And I realized, okay, the military, why it reflects on a lot of ideals and why we need ideals is because it grounds you in a sense of integrity, a sense of unity that there's something bigger than you going on. And in a way, I love that because it didn't really make me feel small. Some people may take it. It makes you feel like you're part of a bigger purpose. And that's something I found beautiful, where in a sense I had clarity. Soldiers had clarity. You have an objective. You had a sense of honor, like a brotherhood. And that stuff really inspired me in a lot of stuff. Where it's kind of funny you mentioned that because I remember at time before the military, I was really into like abstract concepts and art. And I remember once I went through, I tried going back to looking at some of the old stuff I was interested in. It just looked disgusting to me because I didn't really have that sense of like groundation for like order.
Yeah, I can imagine it becomes quite a shocking experience, especially when you have the comparison. Um,
It felt like you're going to a whole different planet almost, where it's like you see people, they have no fortitude, they have no prudence, they have no sense of like, purpose. And that's really not even just the military, but like a critique I'd get for most of the world. Like a lot of secular world, you don't have a purpose. People are just drifting by. And you see that in a reflection of what they do in a day to day. For people having like dead end jobs or people having, art that they're creating that has no purpose, or even media or food, like nothing has passion in a sense that you see as much from like people who have like more of a structured life. And that's something I noticed a lot, even beyond art.
I love that the conversation is leading to a lot of the principles that I discussed previously, because I think, and I say that when people ask me what do I consider good art, I get this question a lot. And I usually give some criteria. It's very hard to give an exhaustive explanation, or a definition of what art is or what beauty is, but you can definitely identify it because these things are simple to observe, to notice, especially when you have contrast. It's almost like the chiaroscuro in art. You have the high contrast of light and shadow, and you need the shadows to feel the light and the warmth of the sun. You don't perceive the light unless you have that contrast with the shadows, and that's part of our intimate human experience, um, which is that there's such a spectrum of human emotions. It's almost infinite. And as you said, the extremes are so far away from each other that you feel like you're in parallel universes. And what basically takes you out of this mass, because humanity can be a mass, but it can also be glorious. And the more we deviate from the meaning of life and from the purpose that we have for our existence, then we just become a part of the big mass. And it's just chaotic, and everything is, it just becomes arbitrary and random. That's we described. And I think no wonder is, I really dislike actually modernism and postmodernism as terms, because modernism should simply refer to the current era in which we live, and postmodernism is quite of a stretch. But for lack of a better term, postmodernism refers to the philosophy that we often discuss, and we see how far it goes and how much it revolts against order and hierarchy in society. And the military offers you that, and I think the military it's not as respected as it should be, and it's getting, I think, how should I put it? I think people really start to despise the military just because of these reasons, and they find all sorts of other reasons that are not really substantial or consistent with anything with the reality. I think there's a lot of disrespect going on, and I think it has to do with the rejection of order in hierarchy. And why do you think hierarchy is important in a society?
You're asking for like the whole society, correct?
Yes, in general, because I think the tendency today is, of course, that's not to deny the equal value of everyone, every individual, but there is some sort of hierarchy in terms of how you're placed in terms of your role in society, and people tend to reject that. They want everything to be completely flat. That's
Oh,
kind of one of
my
the
apologies. I was
postmodern
misunderstanding a bit of your
clauses.
question.
Yes.
That makes more sense now. So the reason it's important definitely is because it reflects the natural order of man. And as I stated earlier, when I was talking about art, men, us as people, we have a natural craving. Like it's natural to like hierarchy and order and what is the good and the virtuous. We gravitate towards these things because we know that those are of the good, those are what is appeasing to God. That's why like some of the best art in it usually reflects virtuous morals, such as, a painting of like a knight fighting a dragon, or, a princess protecting her child. Art like that is what is very beautiful. But more on society though, because it's good to promote a common good between man. It's good to have something that can help organize roles more efficiently, such as like having a leader. And I forgot who was the person who said this quote, but without followers, there'd be no leaders. If you have a society where every person's trying to be a leader, you're not going to get anything done. And vice versa, if you have a society where everyone's just trying to be a follower, no one's going to be a leader, you're not going to get anything done. I truly believe everyone has a purpose and they naturally in society would fill these roles. And to accept that is like a first step forward to actually have more order and structure and things.
You
Because
just made me,
without
yes.
order, you have
Mhm.
chaos. You have, what we
Yeah.
have today, where it's like people are walking around with no purpose. And that's very heartbreaking and frustrating. And I've had experiences where people would message me privately and they say, like, hey, I'm not Catholic, I'm not even Christian, but I'm interested in this now, please, like, I don't feel like I have a purpose or meaning in what I'm doing. It's heartbreaking to me because a lot of these are young men. And I don't like you to use the word disenfranchised, but I'd say it could fit the term where they don't really know where they fit in society anymore. It feels like they're just drifting through, and people are realizing, okay, is life really just, graduate high school, go to college, get a job, get a wife, have kids, and die? And I'm like, well, it's not that simplistic like that. Life is a lot more of that. There's beauty in life. And I'm sorry if I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but
No,
trying to
these
wrap
are
it
very
up, that's
important
why like
topics.
it's
These
important.
are very
Yeah.
important topics, and I want you to speak freely because that's how great ideas come or flow. But I think this reflects in the arts. Obviously, art, art imitates life, and life imitates art to a certain extent. And this is the cyclicity um, of like human history in so many aspects of it. But it's so well reflected in the extremes. Um, I actually personally really don't like hyperrealism in art. Um, and also at the opposite end is abstract art. In abstract art, um, where I always say like a good piece of art should show intellect, emotion, and skill. There has to be at least these three components there. Intellect in the sense that you thought about the idea, like you don't go and just create something random. I mean, you can be spontaneous. Spontaneity is not randomness. You need emotion. You
Thank you.
need
A lot
to.
of people don't make that distinction. Yeah.
Yes, that's actually a subtlety that yeah, can go unnoticed. Um, so abstract art basically, I mean, I don't want to make a generic term, but just so people can understand, because there's good abstract art. Decorative art is abstract. It's an abstraction of reality. It's reduced, shapes are reduced to an essence. If I look to ancient Greek uh, ceramics or pottery, or from my, if there are Romanians watching, they know about the Cucuten civilization, the Neolithic, you have these repetitive forms that are actually imitating forms in nature that repeat themselves like fractals. These are pleasant things to look at because we were designed to enjoy order in even things that repeat themselves ad infinitum. They're pleasant. But 20th century, let's say, abstract
Yeah,
art, which
Mondrian, for example. Like when I think of abstract art of the 20th century, I think of like Piet Mondrian or
Mhm.
Jackson Pollock or
Exactly,
Wassily
exactly.
Kandinsky, I believe is her name. And
Yeah, and these things they
yeah,
reject order and hierarchy. And also on the opposite end is the opposite pole. You have the hyperrealist art. And hyperrealism is basically trying to copy as much to with the greatest accuracy what you see in front of you, and you basically reproduce it. You don't design it, and you reveal everything. And when you have everything revealed, you're lost because you don't have a hierarchy of
you
focus.
just become a copy of a copy of a copy at that point,
Exactly,
the
exactly.
hyper realist view.
Yeah, I mean the art where you just make a huge picture of somebody's face and you draw every single pore or every single hair, and you basically imitate a not even the reality, because you usually copy a photograph, a picture, which is already a 2D copy of the reality. So there's no like creative input in the sense of like classical art, which is seeing reality and internalizing it, understanding it, having
It
full
has a lack
knowledge of
of
it.
creativity. It puts
Exactly.
precision over expression, which is a very dangerous thing. I'm sorry if I'm using a bit of a technical skill
Yeah,
like terminology
that's
here,
perfect. Hmm.
but in a sense, that's what it is. If you focus on replicating something to a borderline photographic detail, all you are doing, in a sense, is removing any emotional depth put into this piece. Which, in the end of the day, I'm sure you can agree with this, but art, in a sense, can also be seen as a balance between freedom and order, where you are allowed to like stretch your wings out a little bit and show creativity, but you also have to like have a purpose for what you're doing. You have to have a cause, like, why am I doing this? What am I going for with this? You don't want to fall into, like we said earlier, complete entropy where it's just randomness and chaos, but you also don't want to go to a part where it's almost like so structured where it's devoid of anything. It's like lifeless, even though it's hyper realistic.
You mentioned the balance between freedom and you said chaos or order.
Freedom and order, yes.
Yeah, freedom and order, because the chaos is on the other side. It's almost like walking on the edge of chaos. This is a coined expression,
I'm
and you
I'm
have to balance them.
hesitant. I've heard some people, and I'd actually like to know your opinion on this too. Some artists I've spoken to say art is the balance between chaos and order. I think it's more freedom and order, because simply chaos is the absence of order. That's what it is. It's a negation of something. It's not its own being in a sense, while freedom is its own being. Freedom could be a very good thing, but it could also be bad if not kept check. If it's left to its own devices, it will deteriorate into something that's malignant and honestly atrocious. And same with order. If order, left to too much structure, can be almost tyrannical in a sense where it's so overwhelmingly controlling, you feel claustrophobic looking at it. And that's why I think you should find a good balance in between. But sorry, asking you, I was curious your thoughts on that.
Interesting, because I did read a lot on chaos theory and complexity in science. It's very difficult because it's almost like you're talking about evil. Is evil a substance? Well, evil is the opposite of good. It's the decay of good in the end. So it's a loss of something, just as ugliness is the loss of beauty in the end, and it can manifest itself in horrible ways. And just because it's
It's
so
a
scary, you
continuum in a
think
way.
it's
Yeah.
exactly. So does chaos actually exist? Um, yeah, it's almost like talking about abstract numbers. Do they really exist, numbers? But they're absolutely necessary in describing reality. So I think it's in the same way, because there's a chain of causality in everything. There's cause and effect. And as long as you have cause and effect, then you can't really take chaos in its, let's say, basic sense, which is complete lack of order. Because the chain of causality implies an order. There's a reason why something happens. So yeah, it's one of those fine lines between science and philosophy. I mean, you can answer this question philosophically, you can answer scientifically. Also, scientifically, I don't think you can talk about chaos as long as atoms or the subatomic particles will always work, as long as God decides to keep this universe based on the same laws, uh, according to which they were designed to work. So it's always going to be order, order multiplied from a micro universe to the macro universe. So I don't know if I answer your question.
No, you did
So,
definitely. And I know we're getting into the realm where it's kind of merging over from philosophy to other, like mathematics, for example. And I'm sure there's some people who would like to argue with me after this podcast over chaos theory and mathematical chaos. But that's really not my strong suit as much as like philosophy is.
you do need philosophy for everything. I really like to say that there's, talking about hierarchy, there's a hierarchy in the pursuit of knowledge. You have to understand that you have to start with theology, the cause of all causes, and that's God. Some people may reject it, but it's actually a logical imperative to assume that there's an initial cause for everything that is in being, in existence. And to me, that's theology. And from theology, philosophy, which actually means the love of wisdom, derives. And out of philosophy, there's science, because science needs to have a theoretical framework in order to interpret whatever we observe. We have to have the worldview in which we accept that there's a cause and effect. There's logic, there's reasoning, there's the rules of logic, and there's like laws in this universe. And once we accept those things, then we can interpret everything else. Um,
Definitely, you need some groundation of it. That's why you have like the law of identity and other logical things like that. I agree.
so talking about because we touch upon art, we touch upon philosophy, and just to jump to another extreme, because it doesn't really follow a logical um, consequence what I'm asking. But you mentioned that one of your passions is powerlifting, and I really, from what I know about you, you know that I think you also take it as a part of your Christian discipline to take care of your body. And I
Yes,
think that's
definitely.
very little talked about, because uh, our bodies are the temples of the Holy Spirit, and the implications of that are very little considered, I think, in today's society. Um, but Yeah, you have this Roman maxim, mens sana in corpore sano, so it's healthy mind in a healthy body. Um, would you like to talk a little bit about that and maybe give some encouragement for people? I know like there's so many things going on in this world, so we can just play our cards to the best of our ability. It's not that we all have to pursue powerlifting or be performance athletes or anything, but the discipline of taking care of your body should be uh, something that we should all focus on.
Yes. So I'm trying to think of how I want to tread about this because it's a topic that's very deep. But I always thinking back on this, and I'm trying to remember a quote by Pope John Paul II, but I believe he said something along the lines of the artist does not create beauty by himself. He is, in a sense, the minister of beauty, which comes from God and is manifested through his work. So at the end of the day, I do see our bodies in a sense as being, work for what we are, as in we are almost a slab of marble. And this was beautifully said if you ever go into like the powerlifting or bodybuilding communities where they don't view their bodies as being mere flesh and blood and bone. They see it a lot more. They see themselves as, okay, I am both the marble and the sculptor. How am I going to like chisel myself out in the certain way I want? Do I want to add more of a density to my shoulders? Do I want to have more volume and definition in my pecs? Do I want to have more of a balance in my thighs or my calves? Everything just boils down to how you could look more aesthetically pleasing in that sense and feeling good. And in this way, going back to divine harmony, it reminds me of almost pursuing an elegance or precision in what we're doing for every move. And powerlifting, especially for me, what's so beautiful is that you're in a way putting your body under certain strains of weight. And at first you think you can't do it, but then the more you learn the technique, the more you realize how much easier it could be. And that's what I love about it so much. And to me, it's almost like mastering your own form of like what you're doing. And since everyone's bodies are different, it's slightly different road that everyone has to take. And that's something I find interesting because in a sense, you do have the fundamentals and the basics of powerlifting. And from that, the more you get into it, the more you go in your own path and journey. So I always do view the body as a temple. And for us, when building that temple, you do so first with humility and respect to honor of God. So every action you do in the name of the Lord. And I find that beautiful because it's not just physical strength or muscle, but it's you developing a discipline that is required around this field for you to hone your craft and to nurture and take care of what is basically a sacred vessel, what's you. And it's really beautiful to me because what I recommend young men do is that in a way, you are celebrating God's creation, which is you. And people don't think about that much, but we are created, by God. We are the very beauty, like every motion and contrast we do between our stillness and our action, especially in powerlifting, that is an appreciation or celebration of God's creation, which is the human body. What is our capability? What is your limit? Push yourself beyond that limit. And that is what's beautiful to me because you're embodying the strength and grace and power that you are capable of possessing. It's just innate power that you've not tapped into. And to me, this is beautiful because it's very inherent in God's design of what is the human form. So by doing these things, not only are you a witness, of the Lord, but you're also witnessing, faith through strength, where you yourself become a depiction of what is this thing, such as like a painting where you are a witness of God's gift through the medium of strength and discipline. You become like a tool in a sense, and not in a derogatory sense, but you become a honed craft self of being. And that to me is just beautiful. So for young men who are interested in doing it, I definitely say one, if you are going into powerlifting, the first thing you need to do is negate all ego, leave that at the door, throw it away. You don't need that anymore. What we're doing. Second, know that you are always going to be a work of progress and you're always honing your skills. Third is always listen and learn and have humility in your approach. This is something that takes time. No artist becomes a master the first time they paint a canvas. But if you have an artist who paints 1,000 canvases and they have practice repetition, you're going to see results. Same with powerlifting. If you push yourself and you set boundaries and goals for your body, eventually going to be a point where it's going to feel euphoric. You're going to feel great. I remember my first time being able to deadlift 315 pounds. I felt amazing. I got such a euphoric
Incredible.
high from that. And I was like, nice. I was able to push myself to my goal, what I first wanted to do when I got in there. And what's funny about that is a lot of people think, oh, so once you hit your goal, that's it. No, why not? Keep going, keep climbing. My current goal I'm trying to do is 405 pounds for a deadlift, which is 8 plates on total, so 4 on each side. And I look forward to striving and like hitting that goal, but it's just something beautiful I find in it because in a way it is an art form.
There's so much plasticity in everything. Like the way our bodies are. I mean, everybody has a specific type. It's like a potentiality of what it can be. And it takes our initiative and our action to make that potentiality into an actuality. Um, but the limits to what we can do, there probably will never be able to grasp in this short lifetime. And it's something that probably people who are not doing this, they're not pursuing something physical that involves a lot of discipline, they might have the wrong opinion that it would build pride. And I think there's this misconception that pursuing excellence in anything will also ultimately lead to pride. But I think it's incredibly humbling because every stage that you take, every step forward, you realize how much you can do, but you become also more astute in noticing what else can be improved. Because everything is asymptotic, we will never reach perfection in this lifetime. But this awareness of how much more you can actually do until you reach that ideal that you see more and more clearly, I think that is an incredibly humbling experience. So not only does it build discipline that I think reverberates in every other aspect of your life, but it's also an incredible sense of humility. Um, I think you agree with that.
No, definitely. And a really brief story on this. And for the audience who don't know, there's a certain figure named Eddie Hall, and he is one of the most, if not the most famous powerlifters ever. And what he did recently, I believe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, was he ended up deadlifting 500 kilograms. And I believe, what is that? 2 pounds. Would that be roughly 1,100
I could check,
pounds?
but 500 kilograms is, I mean, it's very hard to imagine. It's
And that's the
mind
thing.
blowing. It's truly mind blowing.
He made his goal that, and I remember him talking, and just the beauty of this by itself was that from knowing his story, knowing how hard he's worked
That's
to,
1,100 pounds.
phew, yeah, knowing it's boiled down to his moment. Like before he was even doing this, he told them, and he had a bunch of doctors saying, "You cannot do this. It is impossible for you to do this. The human body cannot handle this. You will die." And he, in a way, him being stubborn didn't listen. He only cared about, like saying, like, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this in honor of God, in honor of my wife, and in
Amazing.
honor of my children, because he wanted to be the guy to be the first human ever to break through that record and get that. And if anyone's listening, I'd recommend looking up the clip Eddie Hall 500 kilogram deadlift. And here he comes out on a stage of thousands of people watching. He's gets the weight and he pulls it and it lifts off the ground a little bit. And immediately he starts bleeding through the nose and through the ears and a little bit through the mouth, but he's pushing himself. And there's a moment where he stops and you see him look into the crowd directly at his wife, who's sitting first row, looking at him, and it's all of his children there cheering him on. And this guy ends up smiling and pulling it all the way up, holding it. And then the moment the judge like told him to drop it, like he put his arm down, he like dropped the weight and he immediately collapsed, basically. And
Hard to even
he,
listen.
it's amazing because like he ended up like a moment like his whole body just collapsed from all that pressure, but he immediately was rushed to the hospital. But during that time in the hospital, he was just smiling. He had the biggest grin on his face, and he was giving a thumbs up because he knew he broke the record. He's the first human ever to do that. And it's
Amazing.
it's in a way like to me showing you what the human body is capable of, what you were capable of if you focus something that something is not on yourself. Because not once in any of these interviews they said, I want to do this for me. I'm doing this for money. I'm doing this for my ego. I'm doing this because I want to do this. He said purely, I'm doing this for all these other people but himself. And to me, this altruism was just beautiful. And I remember him talking about like he just mentally trained himself to, in that moment, think to himself, I'm doing this for my family. I'm doing it for my wife and kids. And he says if he did not have that mentality, he would not be able to lift that weight. And to me, it just shows you the beauty of like really the powerlifting community, like events like that. And to tie this back to me personally, I remember when I first started getting into like the gym and doing these things, it was rough because I had all the wrong reasons I was lifting weights. I was telling myself, oh, I'll just lift weights really heavy, so I get women to like me. I'll lift weights so people will like me, society like me. All these are reasons.
Yes.
None of them, it was just very shallow reasons. And I remember getting frustrated and seeing like one of the biggest people in the gym there who's like, he competed locally at like powerlifting competitions, and he saw me there frustrating, basically nearly killing myself under like weight that I shouldn't be doing. And I remember him coming by and one handing picking up a bar off of me that I was struggling on and placed it. So that's just the strength difference between me and him, and just me being utterly embarrassed. And then afterwards, he talked to me and he's like, "Hey, why are you doing this? Why are you here?" And I told him all these reasons, like, that's not, and then he flat out said to me, "That's not why you're here. Why are you truly here?" And I realized, like, wow, I don't have a reason why I'm doing this. All my reasons are shallow. And I had to really sit and reflect on myself and be like, okay, I'm going to try this again. I'm going to get in there with a different mentality. I'm not doing this for like shallow reasons. I'm going to do this, for my family. One of my biggest motivations was my abuela, who's in
Your
Florida.
grandma.
She's a very sweet old lady. Yeah, she has a little mango tree in her backyard. And I remember telling myself, I'm going to get strong so I could carry in all the mangoes that she needs me to grab from her tree.
That is so
So I have
sweet.
the strength to pull myself up there and take them. So I remember like this tiny little 4'11" woman speaking Spanish to me. She would just point a tree where she wants me to grab mangoes at. And I was spending the whole day doing that. And I felt so happy afterwards. I was just doing that, helping her out. But definitely for younger people listening to this, if you're going to start working out, drop the ego, drop the I'm in here working out to fight demons, or I'm doing this because a girl broke my heart, or I'm just trying to get big so people could like me. Don't
These are
do that.
the mainstream social media reasons that,
Yeah.
yeah, you're confronted with.
And honestly, I have a huge critique of that too, to social media stuff, because there's so many times you'll see these, not all of them, but a lot of these bigger dudes who would be taking anabolic steroids and stuff, but not tell their audience. And they'd always post pictures of them with like very scantily clad women, very beautiful women from all over. And it's them just being huge and being like, oh, look at me and look at you. And it's like a very down tone
Downgrading.
talking. It's a downgrading thing. He's like, we're like the person to make fun of his audience, be like, yeah, you'll never be like me. And in a way, it's not really a good mentality to have for people, because you're setting up this false persona or image that, oh, if I lift enough weights, if I do all these things, then maybe I'll get women like that. Maybe I'll get all these very shallow, hedonistic things. And then maybe this is what the very core issue of it boils down to. I'll be happy. I'm sorry, but it really wouldn't. And in a sense, that makes me sad, because trying to tie this back into art, like we've been talking about, art should be something that brings joy and brings beauty. If you turn what is something like powerlifting and manipulate it to be a very disgusting, grotesque, hedonistic like thing, a tool to like, pursue vices. It no longer becomes art. That becomes the bastardization of what art is. And that's very heartbreaking to me. And it's very manipulative, and it like sets a very wrong persona or like image for like younger men trying to get into this. Powerlifting, I understand it's traditionally like a masculine or male thing. I don't think it's the only physical form that is art. I'm sure for women as well, ballet, that is a very beautiful, elegant form for women to pursue, being a ballerina, or even acrobatics or Cirque du Soleil. All of that is very beautiful, where it naturally caters to like the feminine, mystique, like what is
Mm.
like the core of this. And I think it's very beautiful and very noble and modest for women to pursue. But that's just the last thing I'd like to add on to that. I'm sure you can add on a lot more than that than I can.
Oh no, that was absolutely beautiful, and I love that. And I'm actually trying to contain myself because I would love to continue on so many different directions. We could talk about social media and this distortion of beauty there for both women and men, or girls and boys, because that's so much to talk about there. So if you rely on your ego, if you do things like the world, let's say generically, the world tells you, follow your heart, which is the worst advice you can possibly follow. Do it for yourself. Think about yourself. Love yourself. Um, we could talk about that as well. You only get this far. You're cheating on yourself because you're killing your potential. Great achievements of athletes, of individuals, of scientists, they're actually achievements of humanity, and they add to the glory of humanity. And that is why it's so aspirational to look at somebody achieving something grand that will remain in history, because you feel like it's part of you in a sense, because you're part of the humanity. It's a body, and we're all members of that body. So it's very, very beautiful. That's why I think we talked about this, and I wanted also to ask you about maybe you have something in mind, some works of art that inspired you the most. But I was thinking about the beautiful Greek sculptures from the classical period or Hellenistic period. And there's so much debate, like people cannot possibly look like that. Obviously, they're mathematically calculated and the proportions are very standardized, um, and they're not sensual, because you can have nudity that is not sensual in the sense that it's pornographic. It points to the glory of humanity in a way that is so aspirational. It only makes you think about the grand things that transcend this physical reality. And I think that's why the classical Greek art, that's why it was always a standard from the Renaissance up until today. People always go back and they never really discover how they actually did it. They just figure out something that resonates so deeply to a core need. And that is a different kind of glory, a glory that is imperishable, that we all aspire to. So, in that note, I wanted to ask you if there's any works of art that you love, that inspire you and make you think about grand things, something probably that you have a copy of at home, or something that moved you at some point in your life. It could be sculpture, music, painting, anything.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind has to be close to Peter Paul Rubin and Hercules and the Nemean Lion. That piece was 16th, 17th century, I believe.
Mhm.
And it's a very like classical art piece. And to me, it's beautiful because it's a display of Hercules conquering the lion in a sense, where it's a symbol of man asserting his dominance over nature, where you see in a painting it's very beautiful because there is a jaguar under his left foot, and at the time Hercules has the lion that he's fighting in a headlock, like putting him down in a submission pose. And on this you see so many like perfect anatomy of the muscular structure, from his shoulder, his tricep, his lats, his back, his glutes, from his thighs all the way down. And the lion just looks like visceral and angry. And you see his like claws are in his calf, but he's still wrestling it. And to me, it's very beautiful in that sense where it's showing you like, the feat of like not breaking, not giving in. But another really good piece I'd say was, I'm trying to think of, probably Alexander Louis Leloir, I believe is how you say his last name. Apologies if I'm butchering his name. He has the picture of Jacob and the angel is what's called the piece. And to me, it's a very beautiful contrast of man wrestling with our thoughts of the divine, the created versus the creator. Like, and to me, it's very beautiful because what's similar in a lot of this period's pieces is man is usually draped in a red cloak. And that is a sense of like symbolic for like, our primal self or like what was a part of us. That's like your more, our vices in a sense. And it's beautiful in this piece because you see the angel being very angelic and it's like pure white with his wings. And it's a perfect contrast of like, the angel and its like elegance, divine beauty and glory, and the man who in this like photo, his cloak is actually slipping off while wrestling with the angel. And to me, I think that's very beautiful because it shows you a demonstration of like us in a way while we wrestle with God to learn more and understand more, we slowly lose our savagery or our nature of original sin and we strive to be better. But that's a very beautiful thing.
Talking about wrestling, I think this is a very important, very, very important topic. Everything we do is a wrestle. And we were talking about the motivator being something very unselfish. You do it for other people, you never do it for yourself. If you do it for yourself, you can go probably a certain distance, but then you will stop because you run out of fuel, basically. Your ego will never get you far in life or in anything. Um, I also wanted to ask you about the main motivator that you have in everything that you're pursuing, but you said like you were thinking about your grandma, you're thinking about your family. I remember there was a Romanian thinker. He said that it's very sad that um, we can only advance in our depth as humanity through suffering. Happiness is absolutely necessary and is something we should pursue. And we were designed for happiness, but in this broken world, unfortunately, suffering is the only means by which we advance in our depth, in our character, in our faith, in the refinement of our whole being. And I think that's why people who excel a lot, they also suffer a lot. They excel in things because they have suffered a lot, and they have a very different drive that people who probably have a very comfortable life, they can't even relate to. It's almost like it's a completely different universe, as we said in the very beginning. But it's almost like the more lucidity and awareness of how the world is, the more drama and tragedy in your own mind and heart. And probably that's why we have this idea of tormented artists. They always suffer. They're just dramatic and tragic all the time. It's because you process the things of the world to a deeper level, I think.
Yeah, and I definitely say be carefully not to let suffering consume you because suffering can be a very good thing in a sense. Well, I don't like to use the word good, but I like to use the word instrumental instead. It could be a very instrumental tool that helps you lead to develop more virtues such as like patience, courage, compassion, and a deeper sense of like endurement where as an individual you grow through your character and moral strengths through this. And in a way, suffering for me especially can be redemption where, especially in a Christian context, suffering is what united with the suffering of Christ. His contributions to one's sanctification, spiritual growth is through Christ. So the very idea is evident in our concepts of like what we see as redemptive suffering, where a personal suffering is offered up in union of Christ's suffering for the salvation of others. And to me, I find that to be very beautiful. But if I may share a Bible verse too on this,
Please
that
do.
means, yeah, because a lot of people say, well, suffering for sake of suffering, what is it? What is the purpose of suffering? Well, I think about John 16:33, for example, where it says, I have said these things to you, that in me you may know peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. That last line, I have overcome the world, is beautiful to me because it shows you no matter how dark things get, no matter how much suffering you go to, Christ is always with you. He's always by your side. He's always there to defend you. And apologies if I tear up a little bit, but to me, it's just so beautiful because that's at the end of the day, what is the purpose of all of this? Is to be with Christ, is to have these things, to strive for a higher goal or purpose. And you could do that through suffering because you would rather want suffering than stagnation. And I'm sure you could agree with this. I know you mentioned it earlier, but comfort is probably the worst drug in the world by far. It
Yes.
weighs out alcohol, weighs out cocaine, anything like that, any drug you're thinking of. Comfort is the worst because by doing this, you fall into stagnation. You basically don't complete anything. You just waste your life, which is heartbreaking. And I wouldn't wish that honestly on my worst enemy, where they can never be truly their full selves.
That's true. When you think about all the implications, it's horrifying. It's the greatest strategy of today, I think. The fact that we have the luxury of allowing ourselves to live in comfort too much. Obviously,
And it's
I think,
disgusting. It's disgusting
yes.
talking to a lot of these postmodernists too. And I know you don't like using that term, but
I
I've
mean,
had
there's
conversations
no
with
other term,
people
so
who,
we should
yeah,
use it.
definitely. It's like I've spoken to people who are like very much consequentialist in their thinking and ethics, and they tell me, like, oh, all we need is happiness. It's the only thing we strive for: happiness, happiness, happiness. Which is like, okay, good, but like, what is the purpose of this? Why are we pursuing this? Happiness for the sake of happiness is nothing but mediocrity and comfort, and that's unfortunately what you lead to. Where in a sense, I think about, for them, they told me, peak happiness was them choosing, being in a pod, having dopamine receptors hooked up to them 24/7. And I'm like, that's not life. That's not living. That sounds like hell. Excuse my language,
Exactly.
but that's literally hell.
No, that it definitely, I mean, why should I excuse your language? Because you're being very descriptive and quite accurate. I think it does sound to me exactly the same because happiness is not, happiness is a fruit of something more substantial. It derives from something. You can't pursue it for its own sake. You have to pursue something else out of which happiness derives. And I think that's what a
Exactly.
lot of people don't understand. They think happiness is this thing, which it isn't.
Even
Happiness
in
is a reaction
relationships
to
too.
something.
That's a
Yes,
perfect contrast right here from, in a sense, the traditional or religious compared to the like secular societies today. Like people today say, "Oh, I'm going to get in a relationship. Why?
yeah,
Oh, I just
exactly.
want to be with someone. Why? Because I just want to be happy." I'm like, have you never thought about yourself or your own personal goals or your ambitions or your struggles? Why are you just satiating yourself of this for like the sake of like meaningless, like hedonistic pleasure, basically, which is unfortunate. And I think there's a very big difference between, being chaste with yourself. Like there's a reason, like, Christianity believes in like chastity and like, modesty, being chaste and modest of yourself about relationships and pursuant of that, compared to someone who goes around, meets up a bunch of people, is constantly in hookup culture. It's like very sad to me. I'm sorry. It's just sad. It's equivalent to having straw in a fire compared to having a roaring furnace to burning embers. Like, which one are you going to pick? I don't want the straw in the fire. Why would I want that? I'm okay waiting longer for like the burning embers of the furnace.
I mean, I also talk to a lot of people and I also talk with students a lot. And um, I think I can say, I mean, this is probably a truistic statement for many people, but um, sometimes things can look in a certain way, but they're not like that. I think depression and anxiety, they've reached a historical high right now. And there's many reasons for that. But people, there's such a pandemic of, um, it's an addiction to medication. Even here in Denmark, people go to the doctor and they say that they're depressed and they get diagnosed with depression and anxiety and they get pills. But actually, if you have common sense and if you have a basic understanding of how the world works and operates, if you have a sense of what is good and what is evil, then you should be depressed. That is normal. It's absolutely normal because it should make you sad. Things are obviously not the way that they ought to be. There's something in us that tells us this is wrong. I don't want it to be like this. I don't want death to exist. And if people say that, yeah, I mean, that's a natural thing. I have nothing against death. It's fine with me. I'm talking about people who reject God, that they live a nihilistic life. At least the idea of infinity, of eternity, that it might be possible. That if you reject that and you think that this is all that there is, then anxiety and depression are normal. Like, you should feel those things. But at the same time, I like that you pointed out we have to strive for happiness and joy. I mean, how many times is it mentioned in the Bible, rejoice? Like, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, says the Apostle Paul, rejoice, in Philippians chapter 4. So we cannot escape suffering. Some people do suffer probably more than others. Suffering is hard to quantify because we don't know what goes on inside somebody's heart and how they process reality, how sensible they are to things around them. But we have to overcome it. And I love that you brought that verse. Like, Christ has overcome the world, and through him we can be victorious over everything. And talking about the power that we have, that God gave us, the plasticity that we have over our bodies and the things in our life, it's the faith. If we have faith as small as a mustard seed, we can say to the mountains, move from here to there, and they move. That's what Jesus said. It's so incredibly powerful. If you have thoughts about this, because Jesus often said your faith did this to you, you did it because of your faith, or you were healed because of your faith. In a sense, he almost gives you the credit of trusting him and having that faith. We know that it is the power of God, but we also see that God already gave us a certain amount of power that is, even for us, it's hard to grasp.
At the end of the day, I'm sure in both the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox tradition, we do believe in mysteries of God, and there's some things that are simply beyond our understanding or grasp. And I'm also okay with that. And I already know he's laid out a plan. He's already made his promises. And I'm in pursuit of, trying, like I said at the very beginning, and appeal to heaven, try my best to get as close as I can, and being a person good for not the world, not for society, but for God.
And what I find to be great art, that it has to show something of the mystery of the existence. And there was another Romanian philosopher that was talking about cubism, or like Picasso's art, because he deconstructed everything and he put everything on a plane. It's almost like you want to be surgical, or reveal everything that it is in a being on a plate, decomposed. And that probably has an analogy in naturalism. You just look at matter and you think that the existence of an organism is the sum of its organs, which doesn't really work, because life is not the sum of the organs. And any being, living, breathing being, is not the sum of its components. So if you reveal too much, like in hyperrealism, you take away the mystery. If you make it too abstract and random, it's too deconstructivist. And I think that's like a subtlety that one should be keen on when looking at a work of art or creating one. And I think that's what's missing today, because we reject the mystery of life, that which we cannot define, but our soul can identify. We have other organs of knowledge. It's not just our rational apprehension of the world. It's also our intuition, the things that are above reason.
No, definitely. And the reason I do believe mysteries are very important is because there are, not only from a theological perspective, but like theologically, we know and affirm that there are divine truths. So profound truths about God, and that are divine beyond all human comprehension. A good example of this could be the incarnation, the Eucharist, the Trinity. But in the same way that it's beautiful for faith in our revelation, so we embrace these mysteries because they're to us understood through divine revelation and acceptance of faith. They're not contradictions, but more profound truth that invite us deeper into this understanding. And for even a spiritual experience, I'm sure you could speak on this more from the East, but to me, it's almost like a mystical participation. So as we are invited as believers to look into this more deeper, we experience, participate in this divine life, and we celebrate through our liturgy, through our sacraments, through our prayers, through our songs, through our art. Even we enable the faith deeper to engage with the divine in a more transcendent way than just an ordinary standard way. And through this transformation that we engage in, these mysteries transform our lives and aligns us to more closer to God's will and has a deeper relationship with God. And I believe truly to get closer with God is to be more in tune with, with beauty, to be more in tune with the aesthetics, that what it makes us, beautiful, and have a deeper understanding for these things. That's what I feel like would help us bring us closer.
Good art is a luxury. And it is a luxury because I think great art is created in times of peace, when you have the time and the resources to develop within that realm. But at the same time, it is a necessity of life on this earth in a sense. It's not something that you can either pursue or not pursue, enjoy or not enjoy. Like, the church needs art for very good reasons, and I think you could talk a lot about it, especially coming from the Catholic Church. You mentioned that, you said it, I think, more or less explicitly, but why do you think church today needs good art? And why do you think, I mean, not just Christians, but people in general need art in their lives? Could they live without it? How does that improve the quality of their lives?
I'm going to say the controversial statement that no, I don't think people could truly live without good art. And I believe truly that's why we see in society the highest rates of depression, the highest rates of suicide, the highest rates of all these negative ailments or diseases ever for people. And it's strange to think about that. We're living in an era, an age where we have access to everything. We have almost nigh infinite knowledge in our pockets at all time, which is our phone. We can look up anything. Yet a lot of people are unsatiated, they're unhappy because they don't have a deeper purpose or meaning in these things. And of course, they could lie to themselves about certain meanings, like, oh, I'm happy, I do X, Y, or Z. I drink, go out and party every weekend. And I know that's a lie because that's a lie I told myself when I fell away from the church for a while when I was younger. I was very stupid and I thought, okay, I could mask this with, just alcohol or substances, and then I could be happy. But deep down, I was miserable because it just didn't give me any fulfillment. And that's what art, true art, really does, is it brings you a deeper sense of connection, fulfillment, and it, in a sense, gives you something more of like an opening window for I want to learn more of this. And I truly believe you'll know more for this if you attend your local church or attend that which are like holy. And this is just something for like the Roman Catholic side of me, but it's a good example of this as well. Look at our cathedrals we used to have in the medieval era. Look at the beautiful like buildings we had. They didn't make them pretty just for the sake of being pretty. There was a purpose behind that, and it was an appeal to heaven. Even in our liturgies, for the oldest liturgy of the church, a traditional Latin Mass, for example, it's beautiful to me because the experience in itself is a very sacred mystery that enhances like any solemnity of the mass. And to me, it's so reverent and like high quality of art that has such a depth and richness to it. And that's just sacramentally, it's a pure bliss experience. And it leads you to a time where for once you're sitting there in a sacred, holy place and you realize something. I'm partaking in something that's not about me. It's about a higher purpose. This isn't focused on me. And especially in Western nations, it's a very me centered culture. What about me? What can I get out of this? What can I do? And you have this being like almost a counter, cultural thing versus the world, where it's like, well, you're going to partake in something beautiful and holy that's not about you. It's about the preservation, tradition, and beauty of our church. It's about, the sacraments of our Lord. It's about, the whole Eucharist of Christ. These things to me are just very beautiful. And I honestly cannot say I'd be where I am today if it wasn't for that.
I was talking with a friend of mine also from the United States, and he just reminded me of Psalm 96. And I was just looking at the verse, I think it's verse 6. Splendor and majesty are before him, strength and glory are in his sanctuary, which is the highest form of worship. I think is just resting in God's splendor and majesty. And the beauty of the church is the architecture, all this complete investment of one's intellect, emotion, and being in creating something beautiful to reflect how you the foreknowledge of God somehow, because you have it in our heart, the knowledge of God in eternity, as we have in Ecclesiastes. We have these things ingrained in us, and especially that God revealed himself to us. It's almost, as I said, it's an imperative, and it's so beautiful. And I wanted to ask you as the last, it's not a question, it's more like an advice that you'd give, especially to younger people, because I think the greatest temptation is to be overwhelmed by information. First of all, the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake is not an advancement in itself. It doesn't necessarily mean growth. You just gain information. That's not really building you up. It depends on what information you're building. We have too much information about everything that happens. We're not built to know and be aware of all the evils that happen in 1 minute everywhere in the world that we have now on social media. And so we forget that that's not the only thing that there is. And because the temptation is to think that is the reality, that what I see on Twitter, all these bad accounts, that they continuously perpetuate everything negative in this world, that's all there is. And you get so lost. And at the same time, you crave for more and more information because you want to redeem yourself with some more information, but you have to get out of that loop and close everything down and go outside into the real world and real life and see what it is around you. I think there's so much more beauty that we ignore.
Definitely going hiking too is an amazing activity. I'd recommend people do. Get a couple of your friends, just go out. It doesn't even have to be a long hike. It could be like a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. It's a very brisk hike. It's beautiful to have that because humans by nature, we're not meant to be isolated and alone. And in a day and age where we are the most connected we ever been, we are by far the most isolated in absence. And that's something that I think people should be a lot more frightened than they actually are. And it's scary seeing younger people especially not have any social group at all and not having people who are close to them connected. And praise be to the Lord for the Catholic Church to give me that and give me a good community of friends I have that I try to meet up with at least once every 3 weeks or so. Really great guys.